I'm Kathryn Kidder. Today is July 13th, 2020, and I'm with Margaret Fields. Would you please say and spell your full name?
My full name is Margaret Fields, Margaret Fields.
And your maiden name?
Underwood.
Okay, thank you. And where and when were you born?
Okay, I'm one of these very unusual people where I am actually a native of Gainesville. Yes, I was born at Alachua General Hospital, which that location, it was torn down and, probably about 10 or 15 years ago, and it is now part of the University of Florida. So I thought that was really quite interesting. When I was born, my father was a student at the University of Florida. The war was just over. They had settled here, and the only transportation they had was a bicycle. And so you can just well imagine what that was like. And so they always told me that I came home from the hospital in an ambulance. And for those who don't remember, back then, an ambulance was actually from the funeral homes. There was no ambulance service. The funeral homes doubled as an ambulance as well as other things whenever they had funerals. And so that's how I happened to come to Gainesville, Florida. My father worked part-time, and believe it or not, he worked for Clark Butler. And at that time, there was a grocery store on Southwest 6th Street and about 2nd Avenue. That was the only grocery store that Clark Butler owned. It was close to the University of Florida, close to where we lived, so he could just get on his bicycle and head to work or head to class. And we all know the many changes that have taken place in Gainesville, a lot of them driven by Clark Butler through Butler Plaza, etc. And so that's my home. I did go to the university here. I did leave, as everybody wants to do, as soon as they get old enough. I want to live any place but here. And so I did work for a while at AT&T, and it took me traveling. So I traveled pretty much all over the country. I lived in a number of different cities while I worked for them, transferred here and there. A number of places in Florida and outside of Florida. So is that...
And you still wanted to come back to where you were born.
But I still wanted
Eventually.
To come back. Right. My last 2 years with AT&T was actually at, I'll never forget the address, 4 Campus Drive, Parsippany, New Jersey. It was the corporate headquarters for AT&T Information Systems. And I was an executive with Information Systems. I enjoyed the work. New Jersey is one of those states where it has a lot of hidden secrets within the state. Beautiful, beautiful country, beautiful homes, just really a state that was unexpectedly a great place to go and a great place to live. But after a while, it's not home. It just was not home. And I had moved there from Jacksonville, Florida. And previous to that, I was in Pensacola, Florida, in Orlando, Florida. And so I came home, got married, and settled down, and have been here since.
And what year was that when you came back?
1987. 1987.
Let's go way back to your birth in the bicycling family in Gainesville.
Right.
Where were your parents originally from?
Oh, it's interesting that you asked that. I've been spending about the last almost a year researching our heritage. Both of my parents passed away in 1988, so I was only back 1 year before I lost them both. And so I've always had a deep interest as to, well, where did they actually come from? My father's family, they came from Lexington, Kentucky, but they originally were from Scotland and England. And I was able to find the voyage when they came over to America and kind of traced the movements of the family until they came to Florida.
What was that grandparent's name, or those grandparents?
That was on my father's side, and my grandfather was Lewis Underwood. And as it turns out, my grandfather, and I remember this, when I was a child, owned grocery stores in Gainesville, Florida also. It was called Underwood Groceries. That was before Winn-Dixie. That was before Piggly Wiggly. That was before anything else that we had as far as a grocery chain. And so predominantly it was just local grocery stores like Mr. Butler's and my grandfather's. And whenever I traced our history, there are generations upon generations of the Underwood family that were grocery store owners all the way back to Lexington. So I guess it was just in the blood that they did that. Exactly. And so like I said, I found the roots to England and Scotland. England was on my father's side, paternal, and my father's side, maternal, were from Scotland.
And her name was what?
Her last name was Hunter.
Okay.
Olivia Hunter. And then I also traced my mother's side. And my mother's side, her maiden name was Ogburn. And I could not find the paternal lineage beyond Virginia. And I was able to trace them from Virginia to South Carolina, Georgia to Florida. And I just came to a dead end. I could not find them anywhere else. Then on the maternal side of my mother's side, their last name was Stormont. And I was able to trace them to Ireland, all the way back to the 1300s. So,
oh, nice.
And I just was interested, so I did do the DNA, and sure enough, something like 87% English, and the rest was Scottish and Irish. So that was interesting. Yes.
Indeed. And now, while we're on names, your parents' names were what?
My mother's name was Margaret Ann Underwood, and my father was William Neville Underwood.
Okay. What was your home like in Gainesville? The first home?
Our first home.
You wouldn't remember that one.
I don't remember a whole lot about it. I do remember one thing. My mother stayed at home most of the time when we were being raised. I have two brothers and a sister. And at one time, I couldn't have been 5 or 6. We had a fenced-in area in the backyard for chickens, believe it or not, chickens. And this is right in Gainesville. Back then, apparently they didn't have all the codes and things that we have now. And I can remember so well sneaking into that pen because I thought, boy, this would be fun. And the rooster chasing me from here to yonder, and my mother having to come out with a broom to hold that rooster in place to get me out before he pecked me to death. So I have fond memories growing up. We did not move a lot once we moved into our permanent home. I think it's probably very endemic to that generation. You found a home, you like the home. They had the home built. And so we stayed there, and that's where both of my parents died. As a matter of fact, we only sold the house quite recently, and we've kept it all these years. So you didn't move around a lot, and as a result, you had neighbors that you grew up with, entire families that you grew up with, and we still maintain contact. And through all these years, we still know each other. It doesn't matter where they're living now. They always come back home at some point in time. And so we sort of grew up together. I lived through integration of schools. Do you want me to tell you anything about that?
Yes, that would be very, very interesting.
It may be interesting. It's I hadn't thought about this to talk about, but I went to Gainesville High School. And when I was in Gainesville High School, the only high schools in Gainesville were Gainesville High, PK Young, and Lincoln High School. And there were no others. If you were Black, you went to Lincoln. If you were white, you went to Gainesville High. If you were affiliated with the university, you went to PK Young. All right. And that's sort of how it worked out. And in my senior year, which was 1965, we had our first encounter with someone who was Black in our school. I was in 12th grade, and the first 12th grader was Yvonne Wright. Now remember, my name was Underwood. Her last name was Wright. Back in those days, you sat alphabetically most of the time. Therefore, she always sat behind me, right? She or Dale Turlington. Dale Turlington was well known in Gainesville too. And so I did know who she was. I did talk to her. It was a novelty for everybody. I remember those years very favorably. I have read accounts where the Blacks did not see things the way that I saw them. And I'm sure there's a lot of cultural reasons for that. In the 11th grade, it was, it'll take me a minute to remember his name. He just recently passed away. But he, I didn't encounter him very much. Joel Buchanan was his name. Okay. When I did encounter him, he was delightful. And then in the 10th grade was Sandra. I believe her last name was Williams. And I had ties to Sandra, and I had a little bit of ties to Joel, and that my father was very close to the Black community. He often would run the movie theater for them. And so I knew who they were. And again, I did not have any difficulties. I never saw any of them being mistreated. I would say that more often than not, people just did not engage with the three of them. But I never saw anybody going out of their way to say anything, do anything. But of course, you know, I don't see everything either. And so I just thought more of, wow, you know, they were here. They probably did not want to be there. If you look back, Yvonne Wright was the daughter of T.A. Wright, who was the activist in Gainesville at the time, and the pastor of the church right off of Northwest Fifth Avenue, which was kind of the headquarters for the Blacks, which also was next door to the theater that my father would run. And so I think they had a hard time getting people to volunteer. So all of them had some sort of a tie to T.A. Wright in one way or another. And that's why I knew who they were through my father. And so I never, like I said, I never saw anything. I never, just never witnessed anything that was ugly or untoward, any of them. But looking back, I can see where they were in a place they didn't want to be. People did not invite them places. They did not encourage them. But I never saw anybody get up to move because they were next to them or anything like that. But I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just never saw it. And like I said, throughout my senior year, I sat next to Yvonne Wright more often than anybody did. You know, so we would speak, but that was about it, right? It was a tough time, I know, for them. At the time, I didn't realize that and I didn't recognize it. I was very young and I just thought, oh, okay. And my younger sister, who is 5 years younger than myself, she's the one who ended up experiencing the worst part of the integration. As you probably know, after the trial, the pilot of the 3 students, our city officials decided to force integration. And as an adult, I can see how wrong that was. It was asking the Blacks to give up the center of their life. The schools were the heartbeat of their communities. It's what kept them together. It's what gave them community pride. It's how they had been for generations. Their children, their grandparents, their parents, everybody went to Lincoln High School. And that tradition was just ripped out from underneath them with no planning, no anything. They could have just as easily said, okay, Gainesville High, you're going to go to Lincoln. But they didn't. And the hardships that came were astronomical. Forcing them to be bused, forcing them into situations that were foreign to them, forcing them to give up their sports, give up their band, give up their heritage. It's absolutely unbelievable when you look back on how that happened. It's an embarrassment, I think, for our city that they didn't have the foresight or put in the effort to understand culturally what was happening. So yeah, I lived through that.
Do I remember that they did that at mid-year instead of
Yes.
at the beginning of the school year?
I think you're right. I think you're right. And as a result, there was a lot of disturbances on campus. And I remember that my father would have to frequently go pick up my sister from school in the middle of the day because they would close the school because of the disturbances. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
that was
we think we have it bad with the pandemic. They had it equally as bad. Their entire life was disrupted. And you talk about kids right now, well, they missed their ceremony for high school graduation. Well, look at what happened to them. Not only did they miss their cultural ceremony that they would have had, everything was ripped out from underneath their feet. Absolutely everything. So it was a horrible time in history, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was definitely a strong description that you give of that period.
Yeah.
On a totally different tack,
Mhm.
did you have had much of your career related to technology? And
Yes.
did you meet computers in high school? And did you
No.
see? No.
Oh, no. Oh, no. No, I did not have, I didn't even know what a computer was until I was with AT&T. And it was before I went into the information system side of AT&T that I did my first introduction. And most of the work that I did within information system had to do with point of sale terminals. Point of sale was brand new. People didn't understand what it was, and we built systems to track inventory and to reconcile inventory and to do all other kinds of things that would be directly from a computer. Recognizing the touch, recognizing the sequencing of things. So we did a lot of work, but it was primarily for the point of sale terminal at the time. Mm-hmm. And at the University of Florida, whenever I returned to Florida, I left AT&T. Didn't know what I was going to do except get married. So we got married. And of course, I married an Aggie. And that's why I'm here today talking to you. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do. So I ended up ultimately with the University of Florida, and it was a good move. I was talked to about joining the agricultural college. And I did give it a lot of thought and ultimately decided against it. And hindsight tells me that was the right decision, even though it would have been a wonderful place to work, wonderful people, absolutely no doubt about that. But I wanted to make things or my career on my own. And I did not want to put myself in a position to say, oh, yeah, well, her husband is, and that's, so that's why she's here. And so anyway, I went into the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences instead. And it was a good decision. Yeah. I've enjoyed my time there. I've learned a lot. It's been really good. The college has been good to me. Yes.
When way back when you were in high school and college, did you have a vision for your future career in life?
Yes, I always wanted to be in business. That was something that always attracted me. And I didn't see really how academics could meet that, but it actually can. And what I'm doing right now as an associate dean is primarily business related. I have all of the IT group. And so that's a real chunk of our college. And it's a real big responsibility as far as keeping everything current. I also have the communications group. And so the communications includes the web developers, web designers, the writer, editor, project managers, that sort of thing. So what I do predominantly is more business administrative. Early on, I worked with the budget before we hired Kimberly Brown to run our budget. So that was something that was very appealing to me. Academically, though, you can't be at a university and not do something academically. So what I do is I have the interdisciplinary studies majors. And so I enjoy that. I don't have that many students. Right now I have about 50 students. And they're only with me for 2 years because they don't come until they're usually entering as a junior. And then I also am responsible for our accreditation. And I know that a lot of people think, well, accreditation, that is very academic, and to some extent it is, but it's very bureaucratic. Also, I'm not sure that anybody would appreciate me saying that, so we'll just call it, it's more business than anything else, and that is making sure that you are in compliance and understanding what compliance is, being able to track it, being able to document it, being able to justify what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so all of that kind of fits with what I enjoy, and that is being in a business.
So when you came back to live in Gainesville, you didn't really have a big need to get acquainted with the town or meet people like most people do. And I think a lot of people joined the Agricultural Women's Club because they needed those things. What was your motivation?
Oh, well, I was motivated because I had met a couple of the wives and I thought, well, this would be really neat. And so I'll never forget the very first meeting I attended, ever. It was really interesting. There were a lot of women there. You all know Vam York. Vam York was there. And so they went around the room and asked, give us your name and, where your husband works. So they get to me. I don't know anything. And so I said, oh, it's Michael Fields, and he works in IFAS. And that everybody laughed. They said, well, where does he work in IFAS? Well, I don't know. He just works in IFAS. And Vam, she sat next to me. She says, honey, he works in animal science. And from that point forward, she just kind of took me under her wing and she taught me a lot. She says, we're all here because we're in IFAS, one way or the other. Oh, so that was an interesting introduction into the Agricultural Women's Club.
And that was in the 1980s? Or? It
would have been probably 87 or 88.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So your experience of the club was a kind of different era from some of the people, some of the women that had really been longtime members, and but still you remember Gainesville in those older days.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
So what was the club doing when you joined it? What kind of activities?
Okay, the activities were predominantly, I would call it just social activities. I think that was the basis for which they were formed. Originally, was to give the wives of faculty members coming into IFAS a venue in order to learn more about the university, the departments their husbands were working with, and to kind of give them a venue for socializing and recognizing other people in the same industry. And that was the predominant focus. We had started talking scholarships, and I don't remember when the first one was awarded, quite honestly, but it was not a big part of what we did at that time. Generally, we would come up with maybe 4 major activities for the year, and they all had either an educational or a social bent. For example, maybe we would have a faculty member come in, like Elaine Turner, she was one of our guest speakers, to come in and talk about nutrition or talk about labeling or talk about something that would be of interest to the group. And so that was really the focus, was to create those events. Our main event at the end of the year turned into our award ceremony, which is where we would award our scholarships. But many of those, up until more recently, were very well attended by couples. It wasn't just the ag women, but it was the agricultural women's husbands also. And I'll never forget one event that we did at Sweetwater Branch. Sweetwater had just opened. It had not been open for very long at all. And Cornelia was running it. And so Melda Bassett was going to fundraise for us so we could get some scholarship money. And so we were all crowded into the reception area of the Sweetwater Branch Inn on East University Avenue, across from the school board. And Melda worked that crowd. I watched her and I said, my goodness, what a touch she has. I don't know if you were there or not, but there was nobody who got out of that room without a nice donation. And I think it was our biggest fundraiser ever, as far as bringing in the funds in order to have our scholarships. And I would say that Melda was a big force behind that. She was a professional fundraiser too, but she worked that crowd. She did an awesome job. Yes.
So the husbands participated.
Yes.
Sometimes, and families as well.
Yes.
Children.
Yes. Yes. On occasion we had that. I'm trying to remember when we had most of them that didn't have young children, but we did have families. And so just trying to think of an incident, an event, but I can't think of one right off the top of my head. Yeah.
And you said the faculty wives were the people that were joined.
That's
were there
correct.
Also faculty?
Not many at all. I remember that we tried our best to encourage faculty females to join. And the problem was, as they told me, and having worked there for as long as I have now, I certainly understand, is that when they're first hired as an assistant professor, there is a real pressure for them to get tenure. And what they would tell me is that I just don't have time for a social activity. I have to put all of my effort into gaining tenure. And so we were not real successful in getting a lot of new faculty, female faculties to join. We did have people such as Donna Stahl, who was one of the HR directors. She joined, and I don't remember if her husband was an Aggie or not, but I know that she worked in staff, and she's probably one of our past presidents, and she did really a lot of work for the club. But for faculty themselves, they would participate by holding a seminar meeting for us. They would come to, if we were awarding scholarships, and they were involved with that student. They would participate. They didn't, it was just difficult to get them to join.
But there was some impact of the club onto the surrounding university and community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that even the ladies who didn't join, they had the utmost respect for the organization, especially the scholarships that we provided. And so, yeah, it did have an impact. It had one of the things that we did, and as president, I remember doing this. I think I was president twice. I was president by myself once, and we tried something new. One year, we had co-presidents. And so I was co-president, and we had a lot of fun doing that. Marcita Hoffman was the co-president. But what we would do is we would work with the dean's office for IFAS and CALS in order to smooth the way for scholarship applicants, to help with the process, set up the process so that it's a fair process. And if I'm not mistaken, we worked with Jack Fry. I think that's his name, Jack Fry. And he taught us basically all about scholarships because we didn't know what we were doing at all. And so he was just the utmost help as we went through that and learned our way, figured things out. And ultimately, as you know, we endowed some scholarships. And so, but at that time, we didn't have any. We only had what we could raise and people would donate. And Jack would help us through the university requirements, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, Faye Summerhill, maybe, Faye, was the scholarship chairman for years, maybe. Yeah. And so she was another one that she just made such an impact. And then there was George Davis, I believe, George Davis and his wife, also, who made just an unbelievable impact. And the networking, learning the various people and being with them. I remember when George Davis was getting older, he was retired, and he would call on us to come pick him up, take him to the event. And so we would. And to me, that was the importance also of the club, is you built this network of people that you never forgot. And if they call on you now, you stand up in service, or if you feel like you need to call on them, they will do the same. And so that has been just a true impact of the Agricultural Women's Organization.
So you were in on the ground floor of establishing those scholarships from what had been a social club since 1908, yes. I guess, when it was became a faculty wives group.
Right.
So at the beginning, were you selecting the scholarship winners?
Only with the help of Jack Fry. What he would do is he would collect them. He would make recommendations. We would have a committee to go through those. And so maybe he comes up with a dozen recommendations, and maybe we only had 2 slots. Then as a committee, we would go through those applicants. And it was always a hard choice because every single one of them were worthy. And so we would ultimately make that decision, but only with Jack's guidance. Yeah. Yeah. He was part of the Agricultural Women's Club and just didn't know it. Right.
Yes, yes. So you were president twice, and right. That would have given you a different level of involvement.
Yes.
What else did you have to do in that role?
Oh, well, you had more responsibility for setting up the committees, getting the volunteers for the committees, making sure that the committees did meet, We had a committee that would be one who would decide on the events and bring things together. We might have had another committee, I can't remember all of them, who would do the part as far as the learning, bring in speakers. And then we always have the awards committee, scholarship committee. And so I think that that was mostly the involvement, was making those things happen and to work within the university to keep our name out there. Also in the latter days, and I wasn't so much involved in this, but in the latter days was strengthening our ties with the University Women's Club. And so I would say that we had more of a role of the community leadership, more so than just the administrative part as the president, just making sure that the name was still out there, things were going as they should, relationships with the college, relationships within the community. Right.
Were you active when the Agricultural Women's Club celebrated its 100th anniversary?
I was active, but I don't, with my job, I did not have a lot of time. Yeah, I'm sorry to say.
I think I was told that you had something to do with the booklet that was published for the centennial. Did you?
I worked on booklets a lot, so yes, yes, right, yeah.
It's a nice,
I think that
memory.
Deanne Connor was probably the force in more recent years. She took that flag and ran with it as far as she could with the organization, with the celebration of the 100th anniversary, etc. Right. I would have to give that to Deanne. Right.
You mentioned that things changed with your career.
Yes.
Right. And so how did that work out? Doing those club activities, social and administrative, and still.
I began to really appreciate what the faculty were telling me whenever they didn't have time, a lot of time for social. I had been promoted a couple of times within the college, and with each promotion came more responsibilities. And as an associate dean, you're pretty much 24/7. And it had, that with all of the things going on with my husband, his health became an issue. He's fine now, but we went through several scares. He had triple bypass surgery. He's had other things. So yeah, that takes a lot of your time, right? And getting children educated. Our daughter, she is in her first year of a real job. She went to the University of Florida, she was an Aggie. She got her master's degree in food and resource economics. Then she went to Texas A&M, got another master's degree in public policy from the George Bush School, and she's now a policy analyst. So any spare time we had was spent on her, quite honestly. Yeah.
That is, it is always a challenge.
It is a challenge.
all those rules.
It is. It is.
And
we also were involved some with AGR, because my husband was.
What is AGR?
At the Agricultural Alpha Gamma Rho.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Gamma Rho, the fraternity for agricultural male students. Our son was an AGR, followed in Michael's footsteps, and so we were a little bit involved in that. And I believe that Martha Weesty, who is an ag woman, is probably still very involved in that. Yes. So we tried to promote the agricultural community any way we could. Mm-hmm.
Were those activities social or other with the?
They were mostly social, right.
To be a faculty presence or?
Yes, that's correct. For the young students in particular, right, to be there, right. Exactly. Yeah.
So back to the memories, are there any other activities or events or projects that stand out to you as you look back?
Well, we had a lot of fun, and I'll tell you, the most fun that I ever had was co-leading the group with Marcita Hoffman. And you'd have to know Marcita to appreciate what I'm saying. But we had a blast. It was so good to have a partner that you could get along with, that you could have joy with, that you could laugh with. Going over to her house, her coming over to my house, it was really a lot of fun. And I think we did well. You know, it was a year, it was a different kind of an experience, but we went through it and we did very, very well. Yes. And I think she had been a president before also. And so the two of us, we just went for it, had a great time.
What size was the club? What kind of membership were you talking about in the years, the 80s, 90s?
Oh my goodness, I would say 100 maybe. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it was huge, absolutely huge. And then it began to dwindle down because new faculty wives, their lives just was different than it was back in the 70s, 80s. And often they were dual careers, and it wasn't quite the same, where the networking would have been very important in an agricultural environment to have joined a group like the Ag Women. It wasn't nearly as important probably in the 90s, beginning maybe late 90s, because these women, their focus was different. And yeah, and so the numbers did dwindle. Yes.
And so what are your feelings about the fact that now, as of this year, the club has officially come to an end?
I'm disappointed. I am sad. I wish there was some way that we could have resurrected it. I didn't see a way at this time. You have to be filling a need, and the needs have changed. And the needs that we were filling before was really camaraderie, networking, giving some purpose, especially through scholarships. And I believe that people now, and it's not just our organization, it's all organizations. I'm very involved with a Sigma Xi, it's a scientific society. I was president of that also. And we have the same difficulty. And it's just that the culture has changed so much that people don't see the need for coming together into a common group. I believe social media has a lot to do with it. I believe other electronics have a lot to do with it. I think that just the culture itself has changed to the point that people just don't quite have that same interest. They can get that need met in other ways, quicker, easier, and more in tune with what they're accustomed to than our generation could do so, right?
I think maybe the last question I would ask about the club is what would you think the original founders would think about what you just said and about the trajectory of the club over the years if they could have looked ahead 112 years?
I would well imagine that 100 years ago, there may have been some ladies who could have seen ahead, who had that kind of wisdom concerning future habits. But I'm not sure that everybody could have predicted this at all. I think that we are in a new phase. I don't even know what the phase is called, but it's got to be something to do with technology. and how that has just changed the way we live, changed the way we think, and certainly has changed the way that we behave and how we communicate with each other. As far as envisioning what could have been done differently, I think that would have been a very difficult task. I think that some of them probably could see that there would be changes in the future, and some of those changes would be not as helpful to organizations. But as far as being able to overcome those changes, other than us jumping on the same bandwagon everybody else has, which doesn't really feel quite the same. We're Zooming right now, and it doesn't feel the same as if we were sitting over a cup of coffee at my dining room table and discussing this. I would feel more comfortable. I would probably be more open, even though I think I'm pretty open right now, but there's you open yourself up more in that kind of an environment. Whereas others who are growing up in this new social media age, perhaps the Zoom, they feel the same way as I would over my breakfast table or dining room table. Recently, I attended a funeral of a good friend, and one of the thoughts that came up during that service is how many decisions and good took place over a dining room table. It's just incredible. Women are very powerful, and I think that sometimes that was hard for us to grasp and to take on, is that how powerful women are. And this was Polly Doty. I don't know if you know Polly or not, but Polly was an activist in her own way. She was a leader in the community, and many of conversations took place at her dining room table that changed the way the community behaved. That's very, very powerful. And if that was something that we could harness, we could do so, but it would mean that women, sometimes we have the power that we don't recognize that we have. And so going back to that dining room table, that's where I would have my level of comfort. But in the new generation, not so much. Their level of comfort may look totally different from that. They are very comfortable using that thumb to go through and text those messages, whereas we need that close personal touch. So 100 years ago, I don't think they could have foreseen a way out, but I think they could have foreseen that culture would change. Yes.
So is there anything else that is in your mind about your thoughts and experiences of the Ag Women's Organization?
I think that it's something that we need to continue to support as far as scholarships are concerned. I think that, we did a couple of endowments that are awesome. I don't want that to be forgotten. I don't want to ever see where the greats that were here before us and started such a great organization that there's any thought of not remembering that. So what I would like to see, even though we are sort of sunset, to put it that way, is a way to rejoice on a periodic basis of what was and what still can be. I don't know what that could look like, but I think that it's something that we as Ag women could give back to our community. And whenever I say community, I don't mean just local, but national, the community at large. The other thing that I will say, with the Ag women is that we also were able to have some impact internationally. All of us have had visitors in our home of agricultural people from other nations. And so that's also something very powerful on our side. I just don't want any of that to be forgotten. And I would love to see a way that we could acknowledge that and recognize that on some sort of a basis, whether it's yearly, every other year, whatever, but not just to be stuck off into the archives and forgotten.
Thank you. Those are very wise and thoughtful comments that you've made, and you certainly will add to our being remembered because you've participated in this, so that's very important.
Yes.
In view of this unusual year that we're in, I do want to ask you to comment on a totally different subject, which is living through this COVID-19 pandemic. How has that affected your life?
Well, it's affected me in that I'm isolated, like most people are that are actually trying to keep our community safe. However, if you look at it in perspective, one good example would be the people who lived, especially in Europe, during World War II. How many times did they have to keep those lights out at night so that the bombers would not see where they were living? And I see wearing a face mask being my small contribution, whereas those generation that was in Europe who had to keep those lights out, if they turned those lights on, they were toast. And so I just see that as a small sacrifice. I see staying at home as a small sacrifice. I am positive that a vaccine will come out. I am positive that we're going to get back to being able to have contact with other people. In the meantime, I am exercising. I do a lot of walking. I try to get up at least once an hour and walk outside. So it's time for me to walk outside in just a moment, just to have fresh air, to get away from the screen, and to be thoughtful in that respect. And as far as family is concerned, we try to Zoom, we stay in touch by phone. We do everything that we can to stay connected and to feel like that we're there for each other. So my life has only changed in that I'm down to one location rather than two, a bunch of different locations. But I've acclimated to that. And again, I think it's a small sacrifice to pay. I really do. It's a very small sacrifice, and it's not forever.
Thank you. Anything else you'd like to add on any subject at all?
I can't think of a thing right now, but as soon as we hang up, I will. I am sure. Isn't that how it always goes? Yes.
Well, again, it is much appreciated that you've been willing to make this recording and share your thoughts and experiences.
Well, good luck with the project. I am so proud that you're doing it. That is wonderful.
I will now end the interview.
Okay, thank you.